The allegations Meghan has made are simply not true. Her account does not reflect what actually happened, and it has led the public to a deeply misleading impression. That version of events has no basis in...
No one inside the Crown Council expected William to say her name. Not like this. Not with Charles sitting only feet away, and senior royal advisors watching every movement around the table. But when the prince placed a slim folder before him and said, "She crossed a line," the atmosphere changed instantly. What followed was not a disagreement, a family grievance, or another palace embarrassment. In this dramatized account, William was accusing Meghan of a secret campaign designed to fracture royal authority from the outside. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William let the accusations settle before explaining why everyone had been summoned. The fictional Crown Council was an emergency gathering of Charles, Camilla, Anne, Edward, Sophie, senior constitutional advisors, and the prince himself, brought together after private communications supposedly raised fears that sensitive information was being collected for strategic release. A constitutional advisor, in simple terms, is someone who helps senior royals understand how decisions may affect the monarchy's official duties and public authority. What had begun as scattered concern was now being presented as a coordinated threat. William told the room that the fictional material pointed toward Meghan coordinating attempts to obtain private correspondence, encouraging sympathetic former staff members to speak publicly, and preparing selected information for release during a major royal event. The alleged objective was devastatingly simple: create maximum embarrassment at the exact moment Charles and the future king needed the institution to appear united. Harry's name immediately hung over the accusation, even though the prince had not yet directly blamed his brother. Charles said nothing. He removed his glasses, placed them beside the folder, and stared downward while William watched him carefully. The king understood the trap instantly. Condemning the allegations could pull Harry deeper into an already painful family rupture. Dismissing them without examination could leave the monarchy exposed if the fictional records proved consistent. Anne reacted differently. She turned toward William with controlled fury and asked whether he was prepared to stand behind every word. The Princess Royal, traditionally the title given to the monarch's eldest daughter when granted by the sovereign, was demanding certainty, not emotion. William answered without hesitation, "Yes." Then the prince opened the folder. The fictional case, he explained, did not rest on one message. It contained dates, contact records, notes, and separate communications that appeared to move toward the same objective. Worse, one name remained deliberately concealed: a former palace-linked figure who allegedly knew where private pressure points existed and had become the bridge between Meghan's supposed strategy and the royal household. Charles finally looked up and asked how far back it went. William's answer changed the direction of the meeting completely. The first identifiable trigger, he said, came months earlier, during an apparently harmless private conversation involving Harry, a conversation his brother never imagined would become central to the entire fictional case. And before the council could judge Meghan's alleged strategy, William had to explain something far more painful: how a family already divided had reached the point where one private conversation could become a weapon. The evidence on the table mattered, but the people around it mattered more. For William, this was not simply Meghan against the monarchy. Harry was still his brother. Charles was still their father. Every accusation carried memories that existed long before titles, interviews, departures, and public wounds. And as the council listened, one truth became impossible to escape. Whatever decision came next would not punish strangers. It would tear through a family that had already spent years losing pieces of itself. William felt that contradiction more sharply than anyone. As heir, he believed protecting the institution was part of the responsibility waiting for him. An heir is the person next in line to inherit the throne, but here, the title carried a heavier meaning. He was expected to think beyond personal hurt and consider the monarchy's future. Yet Harry was not simply a name in the folder. He was his brother. If William pushed the allegations forward, whatever remained between them could be damaged beyond repair. Charles carried an even crueler burden. The king had to judge what threatened the crown, while knowing that any formal response involving Meghan would almost certainly deepen Harry's separation from the family. He finally looked toward William and asked the question everyone had been avoiding. Did Harry know everything? William paused. That hesitation hurt more than a quick accusation would have. Charles understood immediately that the fictional communications offered no clean answer. Some suggested Harry knew grievances were being discussed and that private frustrations were being shared. None, however, conclusively proved that he understood the larger strategy William believed was forming around those conversations. Sophie watched the prince grip the edge of his chair. She quietly told him not to let anger decide what the evidence meant. The trusted confidant understood that suspicion could become certainty far too quickly in a family already carrying years of resentment. William loosened his hand, but his voice remained hard. Silence, he said, had already cost them too much. Camilla finally asked the question no one else wanted to voice. If Harry did not understand the full extent of the supposed operation, then who did? William looked toward the unopened second envelope. That movement changed the atmosphere again. The prince said the answer could not be understood without returning to one particular evening after a royal ceremony, when an apparently harmless private request had been made. At the time, it sounded small, routine even. Only later did it begin to look like the first clear warning. And to understand why William finally spoke in front of the Crown Council, the story had to return to the night when one quiet request turned suspicion into something much darker. It began without shouting, accusation, or drama. That was exactly why nobody understood its importance. After a formal royal charity ceremony, a former palace communications aide received a private message asking a strangely specific question. Which senior royal staff members still possessed copies of internal correspondence from the turbulent months before Harry and Meghan left frontline duties? The aide initially dismissed it as curiosity. Weeks later, William would look back at that message and identify it as the moment everything changed. The fictional request arrived after a Windsor charity ceremony and focused on material most outsiders would never think to ask about. Archived emails, internal briefing notes, staff correspondence, and private exchanges connected to Harry and Meghan's final period as working royals. Archived correspondence simply means records preserved after their immediate use, often because they document important decisions or discussions. Those records mattered because they could expose more than family disagreements. They could reveal staff tensions, private decision-making, conflicting accounts, and embarrassing contradictions never intended to leave palace circles. The former aide refused to provide names. At first, that seemed enough. Then, days later, another conversation took place by phone. The caller insisted the information was wanted only so Meghan could correct the record. Instead of feeling reassured, the aide became more uneasy. After the call ended, the former staff member wrote down what had been said and preserved the account rather than trusting memory alone. William received that documented account privately months later. He read it once, then again. The prince did not immediately accuse anyone. He fell silent before asking a question that changed the inquiry completely. Who else was contacted? Until that moment, the situation could still have been dismissed as one person searching for information. If several people had received similar approaches, something more deliberate might be happening. The answer disturbed him. A fictional internal review uncovered 2 additional former staff members who had been approached around roughly the same period. None had been asked exactly the same question. One conversation concerned personal recollections. Another touched on where certain briefing material might still exist. Together, however, the requests could have mapped the location of sensitive records, useful witnesses, and institutional weak points. Then William found the connection he feared. A trusted intermediary had allegedly been collecting responses and passing summaries onward, creating distance between Meghan and the people being approached. The intermediary, a go-between who carries information between parties without requiring them to communicate directly, was what transformed scattered curiosity into the appearance of coordination. William immediately understood why the Crown Council had become unavoidable. The person in the middle allegedly knew former staff, but also still had connections to individuals moving within royal circles. The old message had started the suspicion, but the intermediary transformed suspicion into confrontation, and William was about to reveal that name while everyone who mattered was sitting in the same room. William did not raise his voice at first. That made the accusation more devastating. He opened the second envelope, removed a single page, and pushed it across the table toward Charles. Then he named the intermediary, a fictional former royal consultant who had maintained relationships with staff on both sides of the Atlantic. Anne leaned forward. Camilla stopped writing, and when the king finished reading the page, William finally said the sentence that would define the meeting. This wasn't anger, this was a plan. William explained that the intermediary had allegedly spoken with former palace employees while separately keeping contact with Meghan's circle. That arrangement mattered because it created distance. A royal consultant is simply someone hired or trusted to advise on communications, reputation, or institutional matters, and this fictional figure supposedly knew enough people on both sides to make targeted questions look casual rather than coordinated. To the prince, that was what made the pattern so difficult to dismiss. The distinction became sharper with every detail. Public criticism of the monarchy, however damaging, was one thing. Deliberately identifying who possessed private records, gathering personal recollections, and preparing material for a strategically timed release was something else entirely. William argued that if the pattern was genuine, then this was no longer about grievance. It was about using access and timing to create maximum institutional damage. Charles challenged him directly. The king asked whether years of anger toward Meghan and Harry had affected his judgment. William turned fully toward his father. He said that accusation was exactly why he had delayed bringing the material forward. The prince had wanted to be certain he was reacting to evidence, not resentment. Charles studied him carefully, because the answer did not remove the family history between them. It only made the decision harder. The confrontation tightened when Charles asked the question beneath everything else. Did William want punishment, or did he want protection? Protection, the prince answered. Then he added, but protection has consequences. Neither man looked away. William then produced the detail that shifted the room again. One fictional communication referenced a release window falling within days of a major future royal ceremony involving Catherine and Charles. To the prince, the timing suggested that maximum public disruption may have been part of the objective. The king understood immediately why that mattered. Damage delivered during a symbolic event would strike both the family and the institution at once. Then came the most painful note of all. Another fictional record referred to keeping Harry outside the detail until necessary. William said the wording strengthened the possibility that his brother knew grievances were being pursued but did not understand the full scope. Anne remained rigid. Camilla said nothing. Charles now held the page that could force him to act. William had exposed what he believed happened, but exposure was only the beginning. The next decision belonged to a father who could no longer separate the crown from the pain inside his own family. For several seconds, Charles said nothing. The room waited because everyone understood the same thing. William could present evidence. Anne could demand accountability. Advisors could recommend safeguards, but the king had to decide what the crown would actually do. He slowly closed the folder, placed both hands on top of it, and looked toward the people around him. The silence was no longer uncertainty. It was authority gathering itself before a decision that could permanently divide father from son. Charles understood exactly where his power began and where it had to stop. Within this fictionalized account, the monarch controlled access to sensitive household communication, restricted family discussions, private crown material, and internal briefing channels. Crown material simply means confidential information connected to the sovereign, royal duties, and the institution's private operations. The council could advise him, but it could not carry the burden of the final choice for him. The purpose of the meeting was not public punishment, it was containment. William wanted sensitive material protected, while the family determined how much Harry actually knew and whether the alleged information network extended deeper than anyone suspected. That distinction mattered, because Charles was not being asked to condemn his son. He was being asked to protect the institution, while uncertainty still surrounded him. Charles finally asked everyone to leave him alone for 10 minutes. The king remained seated with William's folder directly in front of him. He reached toward it once, then stopped. Instead, he picked up a framed family photograph, held it for several seconds, and quietly placed it face down. The decision he was preparing to make was institutional. The pain behind it was not. William returned when summoned. Charles looked at him and said quietly that protecting the monarchy did not erase the fact that Harry was still his son. The prince answered without hesitation. Being Harry's brother, he said, was precisely why he had waited. He had resisted bringing the allegations forward until the pattern became too serious for him to ignore. Then Charles acted. The king authorized an immediate fictional restriction preventing sensitive correspondence, internal briefing material, and private staff communication from moving through informal channels connected to Harry or Meghan while the review continued. No accusation was declared proven, but the flow of information was being locked down. Charles went further. He ordered a confidential direct message sent to Harry, explaining that the Crown believed people around Meghan had attempted to build an information network through former staff. Then came the question that mattered more than anything else. Did he know? Harry's response arrived far sooner than anyone expected. It contained only a few lines, but one sentence changed the emotional direction of the entire crisis. The Crown had finally acted, yet the greatest shock would not come from another document, it would come from Harry himself, when he realized what had apparently been happening around him. Harry reads the message once, then again. The anger comes first, not at Meghan, not at William, but at the palace, for confronting him with an accusation he believes has already been judged. Yet one line stops him cold. The Crown has evidence suggesting certain details were deliberately kept from him. He sets his phone down, walks away, then returns minutes later. For the first time, the conflict is no longer simply Sussex versus Palace. It has entered his own home. Harry had not been given every underlying record. Charles's message asked only the central question: had he authorized approaches to former royal staff, seeking archived correspondence and personal accounts? Archived correspondence means preserved emails, notes, and private records from earlier royal disputes. His answer mattered because it could change the entire shape of the crisis. If he knowingly approved the effort, the confrontation would be directly between him and the family. If he did not, the fracture would move somewhere far more personal. Harry turned to Meghan and asked the question plainly. Had anyone contacted former staff on her behalf? Meghan did not deny that conversations had taken place. She described them as efforts to understand what records still existed and to defend herself against years of hostile narratives. She argued that knowing what former employees remembered was not the same as plotting against the monarchy. But Harry kept returning to one point. Why had he not known how far those inquiries had gone? The tension changed immediately. Meghan pushed back, saying he had already been overwhelmed by conflict with Charles and William, and that she had not wanted every tactical choice to become another war between the brothers. A tactical choice simply means a specific action taken to achieve a larger goal, and to Harry, that explanation carried a painful implication. Decisions involving his family had been made because people believed he could not handle knowing about them. Harry's reply to Charles was brief. One sentence stood apart from everything else. I knew she wanted people to speak, but I did not know about collecting correspondence. The message cleared nothing completely. It did something more dangerous. It fractured the assumption that Harry and Meghan had necessarily understood every part of the same strategy. William read his brother's response and showed no satisfaction. The The prince did not treat it as victory or vindication. Instead, he asked whether Harry was finally beginning to see how completely private grievance and strategic escalation had become tangled together. His anger remained, but underneath it sat something older: grief over how far the brothers had drifted. Charles saw the danger next. Punishment alone could push Harry further away and turn uncertainty into permanent hostility. Before any wider action, the king decided that William and his brother needed to speak directly. No advisors, no lawyers, no spouses, no palace machinery. The crisis had begun with documents and accusations, but its turning point would come without either just William and Harry, alone, confronting everything they had avoided saying for years. There are no advisors in the room, no king, no council, no Meghan, no Catherine. Only two brothers who once shared nearly every defining loss of their lives, and now struggle even to trust each other's motives. Harry arrives defensive. William is already waiting. Neither offers an embrace. For several seconds, nothing happens. Then William says he did not call the council meeting to destroy Meghan. He called it because he believed silence was allowing something irreversible to happen. William keeps his explanation narrow. His central fear, he says, was never criticism itself. It was the creation of an organized channel for gathering internal royal material from people who once held privileged access. Privileged access simply means private knowledge gained through trusted work inside the royal household. To the prince, former staff being approached about correspondence, recollections, and internal weaknesses crossed into territory far more serious than another public argument. Harry pushes back immediately. He says Meghan had spent years believing the palace possessed enormous institutional power to define her story before she could define it herself. Institutional power, in plain terms, means the influence an established organization has through staff, tradition, media relationships, and official authority. From his perspective, gathering witnesses and records could be seen as self-protection rather than attack. Harry then says what William has expected and still hates hearing. He accuses his brother of seeing Meghan as a threat before seeing her as a person. The prince does not interrupt. He lets the accusation land before answering that his fear grew when private family pain began overlapping with strategic media planning. To him, that was the moment hurt stopped being only personal. The anger finally shifts when Harry admits something more difficult. He says he did not know former staff were being questioned specifically about archived correspondence. His voice changes. He looks down. William's fury begins to drain into sadness, because the admission makes the entire crisis less simple, not more. His brother may have known resentment was being organized, but not necessarily every method being used. William then gives him Charles's boundary. The king is prepared, within this fictional account, to avoid a broader public confrontation if every effort to obtain non-public royal material stops immediately and contact with the alleged intermediary ends. No public humiliation, no dramatic punishment, but the information network must be dismantled. Harry agrees to communicate that condition. He refuses, however, to denounce Meghan publicly or present her as the sole villain. William accepts the distinction. It is the first genuine compromise either brother has made since the crisis began. They leave without embracing. Nothing is healed completely. But they are no longer speaking as total enemies. And by the following morning, that fragile private progress is already in danger. Because 4 words from the council have somehow reached the press. She crossed a line. The brothers had contained the explosion inside the family. Britain was about to turn it into a national spectacle. By sunrise, the private phrase has become public property. She crossed a line dominates the front of a fictional London tabloid beneath photographs of William and Meghan placed on opposite sides of a fractured crown graphic. Television studios abandon their planned schedules. Commentators argue over loyalty, privacy, revenge, and royal survival. But inside the palace, William is not watching the headlines with satisfaction. He is staring at one question every broadcaster is now asking. What exactly did Meghan intend to release? Public opinion fractures almost instantly. Some viewers believe William acted to protect confidential royal information from being gathered and strategically used. Others see the dispute as another example of an institution using enormous influence against Meghan. Confidential information simply means private material not intended for public release, especially records involving staff, family discussions, or internal decisions. That distinction matters because the debate is no longer only about motive. It is about where self-defense ends and institutional intrusion begins. Palace communications staff refuse to discuss what happened inside the council. The silence is deliberate, but it fuels speculation. Every unanswered question creates another theory, and the family is reminded of a brutal truth. Once a private conflict becomes public, control disappears quickly. William hears a broadcaster describe the crisis as brother against brother through the women they married. The prince switches off the television almost immediately. That version angers him because years of grief, distrust, departure, interviews, and broken communication have been compressed into a simple rivalry. Harry is still his brother. Meghan is still part of Harry's life. Nothing about the situation feels simple to him. Meghan watches the same coverage from California. She does not collapse under it. She becomes quiet and angry. She tells Harry that attempts to defend herself are now being presented as an attack on the monarchy itself. Harry listens differently than he once might have. After learning that some approaches to former staff went further than he understood, he can no longer treat every accusation as automatically invented. Outside Buckingham Palace, the public drama becomes impossible to ignore. A small crowd gathers behind barriers, while television crews broadcast beside oversized newspaper reproductions, carrying the phrase, "She crossed a line." One woman holds a handwritten sign reading, "Families need truth, not war." Within hours, the image is replayed repeatedly because it captures what the arguments keep missing. Beneath the institution is a damaged family. Charles chooses restraint. The king authorizes a brief statement confirming that internal confidentiality procedures have been strengthened, but he refuses to condemn Harry or Meghan by name. The message is clear. The monarchy intends to close the institutional vulnerability without turning the family dispute into open warfare. Now one final decision remains. William has to decide whether victory means humiliating Meghan, or whether stopping the threat is enough. The world expects punishment, spectacle, and revenge. But the final verdict will reveal something far more important about the kind of future King William intends to become. In the end, William does not ask for Meghan to be publicly condemned. He does not demand that Harry choose between his wife and his family. And Charles does not turn the monarchy into a courtroom for private revenge. Instead, the crown makes one decision and holds to it. Private royal material will remain protected. Informal access routes will be closed. And no family grievance, however painful, will be allowed to become a campaign built from confidential information. The confrontation ends not with triumph, but boundaries. Charles formally closes the fictional emergency review after receiving confirmation that the intermediary will no longer approach current or former royal personnel for private correspondence or restricted institutional material. Restricted material simply means information available only to authorized people because it involves sensitive royal, staff, or operational matters. The king's decision is deliberately narrow. He is not trying to settle every grievance between Meghan and the palace. He is drawing a line around what cannot be taken from private conflict into public warfare. William accepts that no public naming campaign will follow. The prince tells the council that his objective was never to humiliate Harry's wife before the world. He wanted to stop what he believed had become a coordinated attempt to gather information through unofficial channels. That difference matters. Victory, for him, is no longer exposure. It is containment. Charles remains with William after the others leave. The king tells his son quietly that duty becomes dangerous when it starts to feel satisfying. William answers almost immediately, Nothing about confronting his brother's family had felt satisfying. The future king had entered the crisis angry, but he now understood that anger could identify a boundary without being trusted to decide the punishment. Harry sends Charles one final private message. He acknowledges that boundaries around confidential material should have been clearer, while still defending Meghan's right to challenge narratives she believes damaged her. The monarch reads the message slowly. He does not answer with fury. He simply places the phone down, carrying the sadness of a father who has protected the institution without repairing the family. William's victory becomes narrower, but more meaningful. The alleged information-gathering effort stops. Internal access is tightened. Harry makes clear that he will not participate in obtaining private palace correspondence. Meghan is not publicly destroyed, but she now faces a permanent boundary. Old relationships, former access, and family connections cannot become unofficial routes into the monarchy's private world. That becomes the final lesson. William entered the council, convinced that someone had crossed a line. He leaves understanding that defending the crown requires knowing exactly where his own line must be drawn. Charles protects the institution without publicly sacrificing his son. Harry finally separates grievance from confidential access. Meghan is forced to accept that defending her story cannot mean unrestricted entry into the palace's private world. And William learns that real authority is not proven by how far power can go, but by knowing exactly where it should stop. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.